Some things find you before you're ready. Not people, not love, not even trouble usually. But sometimes the universe decides it's done waiting on your schedule, and it delivers the message in the bluntest, most humbling way imaginable. For me, it arrived wrapped in a crumpled fast food napkin at the bottom of a waste paper bin, underneath a week's worth of coffee receipts and a half-eaten granola bar. I definitely didn't leave there. I remember the exact quality of the light that morning. It was the kind that slants through office windows at a low angle. Pale gold, almost apologetic. The kind that makes dust motes look like they're suspended in amber. The cleaning crew hadn't come yet. The building was mostly empty. I'd arrived at 6:15 because a merger presentation was due to the board by 9, and I still had 40 slides that looked like they'd been assembled by someone who hated themselves. That was my life at the time. Slides, numbers, a corner office on the 32nd floor that smelled permanently of cedar and cold coffee. The leather chair that cost more than my first car, the view of the city spread out below me like a circuit board, all those little lights blinking in patterns that meant nothing to me anymore. I was Lance John, Alpha and Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Halcyon Capital Group. I was 34 years old. I owned 2 apartments, one of which I'd never slept in. I had a tailor and a personal trainer and a standing reservation at a restaurant where the menu had no prices. I was, by every measure that society had agreed to use, doing extraordinarily well. I was also, and this is the part I'm only willing to admit now, profoundly and comprehensively lonely. But I didn't know that yet, or rather I knew it the way you know about a crack in a dam. You're aware of it somewhere in the back of your mind, but you've built your entire day around the assumption that it won't give way. Not today, not while I have 40 slides to fix. I dropped my jacket over my chair, set my coffee on the coaster, because yes, I use a coaster, I'm not an animal, and bent down to retrieve a pen I'd knocked off the desk. That's when I saw it. The waste paper bin beside my desk wasn't mine to empty. It sat between my workspace and the small adjoining station that belonged to my assistant. But our offices shared a corridor and things migrated. The small white stick was visible through the transparent side of the bin, half covered by the napkin, but unmistakably what it was. The little window on the side faced upward. 2 lines. Pink. Definitive. I straightened slowly. I'm an alpha. My instincts are generally good at reading a room, reading a situation, reading the subtext beneath what people say out loud. It's part of what makes me good at negotiations. I notice things, but there's a difference between noticing something and knowing what to do with it, and in that moment standing in the pale gold light with a pregnancy test staring up at me from a trash bin, I was completely at a loss. There was only one person whose waste paper bin that could belong to. Only one person who used that station. Only one person who had access to this office before I arrived in the mornings. Jackie Harper. The name landed in my chest the way names do when they've been living there rent-free for longer than you've acknowledged. Jackie Harper, my assistant for the past 2 years, 3 months, and my brain supplied this without being asked. Approximately 11 days. Jackie Harper, who was an Omega, though he carried it with such quiet dignity that most people forgot or never thought to look twice. Jackie Harper, who left the best notes in the margins of my briefing documents. Who knew I took my coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of oat milk and never, not once in 2 years, got it wrong. Who had a laugh. He tried to keep professional, but that sometimes escaped into the hallway like something warm and golden had gotten loose. Jackie Harper, who was apparently pregnant. I sat down in my chair. The merger presentation glowed on my screen, patient as a saint. I didn't look at it for a long time. The reasonable thing, the professional thing, was clear. I should say nothing. Whatever was in that trash bin was private. People were entitled to their private lives, their private crises, their private joy. It wasn't my business. I should close my office door, call down for more coffee, and finish the 40 slides that were going to make or break a $2 billion deal. I looked at the slides. I looked at the bin. I thought about Jackie, the shadows I'd noticed under his eyes last week that I'd attributed to the Hendricks report, the way he'd been quieter than usual at morning briefing, his usual composed warmth pulled in tight around him like he was trying to take up less space, the way he'd excused himself twice during a Thursday afternoon meeting and come back looking like he'd rinsed cold water over his face. I closed the presentation. I thought, this is going to be a problem. Not Jackie. Not the pregnancy. I mean me. The way something had shifted in my chest in the 3 minutes since I'd seen those two pink lines. The way my alpha instincts, which I keep on a short leash and had kept on a short leash for 2 years, 3 months and 11 days, were abruptly pulling in a direction that had nothing to do with professional distance. I reopened the presentation. I stared at slide 12 for 7 full minutes. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, down the hall, made myself a second cup of coffee I didn't need, and stood there looking out the window at the city waking up below me. And I thought very carefully about what kind of man I was going to be. Because here's the thing about being an alpha that nobody in the self-help books quite says out loud. It's not about being strong. It's not about being in charge. It's about the weight of caring. Alphas feel responsibility the way other people feel temperature, constantly, on every surface of their skin, difficult to ignore. And I'd been carrying the particular weight of caring about Jackie Harper's well-being for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days, while telling myself it was professional, while filing it under appropriate workplace concern, while maintaining exactly the correct amount of professional distance. But here was a test with 2 pink lines in a trash bin, and all my careful filing felt suddenly very flimsy. I went back to my office, finished the presentation, sent it to the board, did not touch the wastepaper bin, did not rearrange its contents, left everything exactly as it was, because whatever Jackie had put in that bin, he put there for a reason. He arrived at 8:47, which was 3 minutes earlier than his usual arrival, which told me nothing except that he was being conscientious, which he always was. I heard the soft sounds of him settling at his station, the quiet click of his keyboard, the shuffle of papers, the small sound of his chair. Then his voice through the intercom. Calm. Professional. Warm in that way he couldn't quite suppress. Good morning. You have a call at 9 with the board, and Mr. Patel's office rescheduled your 2 o'clock to 3:30. Your coffee is on the warmer. Thank you, Jackie. A pause. Brief, the kind that wouldn't register to most people. Of course. I looked at the waste paper bin. I looked at my closed office door. I said nothing. I was very good at saying nothing. It was, perhaps, the skill I had the most overly developed. The board call came and went. The merger presentation was received exactly as well as it needed to be, and I accepted the congratulations from the partners with the correct amount of modest confidence, and then closed the video window and sat alone in my office with the particular silence of having done exactly what was expected of me. Jackie knocked at 11 with the contracts I'd asked to review. Come in. He came in. He was wearing a gray shirt today, the one with the small collar that he always kept perfectly pressed, and his dark hair was brushed back in the neat way that meant he'd taken particular care that morning. He was always neat, always careful. It was, I had always privately thought, a form of armor. He set the contracts on the desk and gave me the briefing in that clear, efficient way he had, flagging the clauses I should watch the pages he'd annotated, the sections where the other party's counsel had inserted language we hadn't agreed on. I watched his hands while he talked. They were steady. Whatever was going on inside him, his hands were absolutely steady. When he finished, he looked up and found me watching him, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered in his expression. He reset it so quickly I might have imagined it. Is there anything else? There were, in fact, approximately 47 things I wanted to say. No. Thank you, Jackie. He nodded, collected himself, and left. I looked at the contracts. I looked at the contracts. I looked at the closed door. I read 4 lines and absorbed none of them. Then I picked up my pen and underlined a clause I'd already underlined, because I needed something to do with my hands, and I thought, tomorrow. I'll figure out what to say tomorrow. Tomorrow stretched into a week. A week stretched into the kind of silence that has its own particular texture, that sits between two people and hums like a live wire. I've spent a significant portion of my adult life being considered observant. In negotiations, in acquisitions, in the careful chess game of corporate maneuvering, I've been described as perceptive, as having good instincts, as reading people well. What I was less practiced at was knowing what to do once I'd read them. Over the following 2 weeks, I noticed things about Jackie that I'd been carefully noticing for 2 years. I noticed the way he pressed a hand briefly to his stomach when he thought no one was looking, the way he'd begun keeping crackers in his desk drawer, which I only knew because I'd heard the quiet crinkle of the wrapper during late afternoon when his energy dipped. The way certain smells, the strong cleaning product they used on the conference room floors, the coffee from the machine down the hall, made him go very still for a moment, as though writing something out. I started ordering different coffee for the kitchen, decaf and a selection of herbal teas, because the office had never had anything but full-strength coffee and I manufactured an excuse about client meetings in the morning. Jackie didn't comment on it. But on the third morning when he brought my usual, I noticed a mug of chamomile tea on his own station. And something turned over in my chest so quietly and completely that I had to turn away and look at the city until the feeling settled. He was good at his job. He'd always been good at his job. But in those weeks, he was extraordinary in the way that people sometimes become when they're operating on pure will, carrying something heavy and refusing, absolutely refusing to let it show in their work. Every document was perfect. Every note was precise. Every meeting was scheduled with the exact right amount of breathing room. And every morning, every afternoon, every passing moment in the corridor, he was careful, always correct, always contained. The warmth was still there but pulled back, managed, directed only where it was professional to direct it. I began to understand in those weeks what I'd been doing for 2 years. I'd been calling it professionalism. I'd been calling it appropriate distance. But what I'd actually been doing was letting Jackie be warm at me from a managed distance while I told myself the warmth was general, that it was his manner with everyone, that I was reading nothing into it. Standing in my office at 7 in the evening, long after the floor had emptied, looking at the city lights coming on below me, I was forced to concede that I had been, in this particular matter, a coward. I'm an alpha. We're not supposed to be cowards. And yet, the thing about an omega's warmth, and I'm speaking only of what I know, what I've experienced, what I felt in the proximity of Jackie Harper, is that it isn't indiscriminate. Omegas are often described in broad terms, in the kind of terms that flatten people into categories. The culture around secondary dynamics had spent decades either worshipping or diminishing omegas. And what got lost in that noise was the simple truth that they were people. People with preferences. People who chose where their warmth went. Jackie chose where his warmth went very carefully. I had watched him in meetings, in interactions with other partners, with clients. He was courteous, efficient, professionally pleasant. But the particular quality of how he was with me, the additional care in the morning briefing, the way he sometimes lingered in a thought before he expressed it because he was checking whether it was what I'd actually find useful rather than just what I'd asked for, that was something he'd chosen. I'd chosen to call it professional excellence. But standing in my empty office at 7 in the evening, 2 weeks and some days after I'd found a pregnancy test in a waste paper bin, I thought it might be time to call it something else. I picked up my phone, set it down, picked it up again. I was a man who negotiated $2 billion acquisitions. I had sat across from some of the most ruthless financiers in the world and held my ground. I had once spent 6 hours in a room with opposing counsel who were using every psychological tactic in existence, and I had not flinched. And yet, I set the phone down again, turned off my office light, went home to my apartment where everything was expensive and nothing was warm, and stood at the kitchen counter eating reheated noodles that I'd ordered 3 days ago. And I thought about what it meant to be this frightened by something that wasn't frightening at all. That was, in fact, the best possible news. If only I could manage to tell the truth about why. The break came because of rain. It was a Thursday. Heavy rain, the kind that arrives without announcement in the way weather sometimes does. The sky just decides it's done being polite. I was leaving late, which was normal. Jackie should have left hours earlier, which was what I had assumed. I came out of the elevator into the lobby to find him standing at the glass doors, looking out at the downpour with an expression I can only describe as carefully resigned. He'd clearly left his umbrella somewhere. He had a bag over one shoulder, that good dark canvas bag he always carried, and he had his arms loosely crossed, and he was just standing, waiting for something to ease. I stood there for a moment before he heard me, which gave me a few seconds of watching him when he didn't know he was being watched. There's a version of people that only exists when no one's looking. When Jackie didn't know he had an audience, his careful composure eased just a fraction. The set of his shoulders was less precise. His face held something soft and a little tired, and something else that I couldn't name. a kind of inward-turned attention, as though he was listening to something inside himself. Then his head turned and he saw me, and the composure came back, not falsely, not performatively, just the public version, assembled quickly, with the reflexiveness of long habit. "Still here," he said. "Apparently." I looked at the rain. "You don't have an umbrella. I left it in a cab last week and haven't replaced it." I held up mine. "I have mine. We can share." Something moved across his face. Very quick. Very small. "You don't have to, Jackie." He stopped. "You live on Clement Street, correct? My car is parked 2 blocks north. The driver can drop you on the way." A pause. The rain hammered the pavement outside, theatrical and relentless. "That's very kind of you," he said quietly. We stood together under the umbrella in the kind of close proximity that two people don't usually maintain in a professional context, and I was acutely aware of the warmth of him beside me in the cold rain. The way he held himself with that particular careful dignity, even now, even tired, even in the rain. The city smelled like wet concrete and cold air, and the streets were mostly empty, and we walked quickly without speaking, and something about the silence was different from office silence. Less managed, more real. In the car, the windows fogged. The driver had music on low. Something instrumental, unobtrusive. We sat without talking for a few minutes, watching the city blur past in the wet dark. Then Jackie said, very quietly, looking out the window, "I've been meaning to speak to you." My pulse, which I keep professionally controlled, did something complicated. "All right." He was quiet for another moment. His hands were in his lap and I watched them in my peripheral vision, not quite still. A small movement of his thumb against his palm, the only outward sign of anything. "I'm going to need to take some extended leave," he said. "A few months, possibly more. I know the timing is difficult with the Harrington acquisition still pending, and I want to ensure a proper handover so you're not disrupted. I can have a transition plan ready by the end of next week." "Jackie." He stopped. I waited until he turned to look at me. His eyes were very dark in the dim light and very steady. And behind the steadiness was something I recognized because I had seen it in mirrors in my worst moments. Someone holding themselves in by main force. "You don't have to pitch me a transition plan," I said. A muscle in his jaw moved. "I know it's an inconvenience. You're not an inconvenience." Silence. The rain against the windows. "The leave is yours," I said. "Whatever you need, for however long you need it. That's not a question. The Harrington acquisition will manage." He looked at me for a long moment. The steadiness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. "Thank you," he said very quietly. "Jackie." This was the moment. The moment that I had been building toward for 2 weeks, or 2 years, depending on where you wanted to draw the line. "Are you all right?" The question was simple. It was such a simple question, and it landed in the silence of that car like something that had weight, and I watched him receive it, watched the careful composure hold for 1 second, 2 seconds, and then, with the smallest sound, exhale. "Not especially," he admitted. "But I will be." "You don't have to be alone with it," I said, "whatever it is." His eyes came back to mine and stayed there, and for the first time since the morning I'd found that test, something was unmanaged between us. Not raw, not dramatic, just unmanaged, present. "Lance," he said. He didn't say it the way he said it in the office, as a professional address. He said it differently. Like a question. Like a door. "I found the test," I said. Gently. As gently as I could. "In the bin. 3 weeks ago. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. The kind that arrives after something has been said that can't be unsaid, and both people are deciding what happens next. His hands went very still in his lap. "Oh," he said. "Barely sound." "I'm not asking anything," I said quickly. "I'm not requiring any explanation. You don't owe me anything. I only want you to know that I know, and that whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it like you've been carrying it, alone, and perfectly, and without asking for anything from anyone." Another silence. Then, very slowly, he turned to look out the window, and I saw his throat move. "It wasn't planned," he said to the rain-streaked glass. "I didn't imagine it was." The other person, he stopped, started again, he's gone. He was gone before I knew. He wouldn't have, he stopped again. It doesn't matter. It matters, I said, you matter. His head turned back to me, and in his eyes, behind everything careful and composed and managed, was something that looked like a person who had been told something they'd stopped expecting to hear. The car slowed. His building. You should go up, I said. You're cold. He looked at me for another long moment, and then he did something I hadn't seen him do in 2 years. He smiled. Not the professional smile, not the courteous assistant smile, but a real one. Small and tired and entirely, devastatingly real. Good night, Lance, he said. Good night, Jackie. He got out. I watched him go through the lobby doors, and then the car moved. And I sat alone in the back of it with the rain coming down and my hands flat on my thighs and the city moving past, and I thought, all right. So it's like that. It had always been like that. I was only now admitting it. I spend a lot of time in my life thinking about appropriate. It's a word with very efficient armor. Appropriate distance, appropriate professional conduct, appropriate consideration. You can live inside appropriate like a house, tidy and well-maintained, and never once have to reckon with the rooms you've walled off. The morning after the car ride in the rain, I came in at my usual time and Jackie was already at his station, perfectly pressed and composed as always. And he looked up when I came in, and there was a fraction of a second where neither of us was performing, where something direct passed between us that we both felt and neither of us addressed. And then the professional morning resumed and we were Lance and his assistant again, same as always. But the room had different acoustics now. Something had shifted in the quality of the air. I was careful. I didn't want to make this harder for him. He was already managing something enormous, and the last thing he needed was his employer adding a complication. So I was careful. Careful to be warm but not overwhelming. Attentive but not suffocating. I kept things moving normally on the surface. But I started doing things differently, in small ways. I put a small fan on the windowsill of my office because the hallway outside his station got stuffy in the afternoons, and the airflow from my door would reach him. I stopped scheduling his lunch hour meetings, which I'd occasionally done before when things got busy, and let that hour be inviolate. I had the building facilities team replace the chair at his station because I'd noticed him shifting in it, and the new one had better lumbar support. I didn't tell him any of this. I just did it because I'm an alpha and I care in actions when I can't care in words, and at that point in time, I still didn't quite have the words. What I had was, I want you to be comfortable, I want you to be safe, I want whatever you're carrying to weigh a little less, and since I can't take it from you, I'll try to make the edges smoother. Jackie noticed. I could tell he noticed. The way he sometimes paused at things, the tea selection, the new chair, the cleared lunch hour, and was still for just a moment before moving on. He didn't say anything either. We were both, it seemed, more comfortable in the language of small acts than in direct declaration. Until the Harrington dinner, the Harrington acquisition required a formal dinner with the client's family, which was the kind of thing that happened in my industry and that I'd always found tolerable in the way I found most obligatory social events tolerable, as something to be executed correctly and then ended. I needed Jackie to attend as a professional support, which he always had at these events. He organized the seating, the briefing documents, the client preferences, the follow-up communication, except this time, when I sent him the invitation details, he came to my office and stood in the doorway with a look I'd learned to read as him about to say something he'd been deliberating over. The dinner is on the 12th, he said. Correct. I'll be, he stopped. It's possible I may not be at my best that evening. There have been some unpredictable hours. He was telling me, carefully and with enormous dignity, that the pregnancy was making evenings difficult, that he might struggle with a 3-hour formal dinner. I can arrange for Marks to cover the evening, I said. Daniel Marks was the junior executive assistant. He was competent, but not Jackie, but that wasn't the point. You don't have to attend. Jackie was quiet for a moment. Then, I'd like to attend, if it's possible to adjust the start time. The worst of it is usually, he stopped, earlier. If we could start at 7:30 instead of 7, I'd be better placed. I had the catering team in the client's office informed that the start time had shifted. When I told Harrington's assistant it was due to a traffic management update downtown, she accepted it without question. On the evening itself, Jackie was brilliant. He always was. He moved through that dinner like he'd been born to manage difficult rooms. steering conversation, managing egos, keeping everything flowing, and if at one point he excused himself and was gone for 7 minutes longer than usual, no one noticed because he'd already set up the next segment of conversation so smoothly that his absence filled itself in. In the car going back, just the two of us again, I said, "Thank you. You were exceptional tonight." He turned to look at me and something warm moved through his expression. "You adjusted the start time," he said, "traffic reasons." "Lance." I looked at him. He was watching me with those dark, steady eyes, and in them was something that was almost bemused, almost fond, almost something else that I wasn't naming yet. "You keep doing things," he said softly. "Small things. The tea, the chair, the lunch hours." I said nothing. My hands were loose on my thighs. "Why?" he asked. The question was very gentle, very direct. I thought about all the things I could say, the professional answers, the appropriate answers, the answers that would allow us to both look away and go back to the managed distance. "Because I want to," I said. He was quiet. The city passed outside the windows. "That's not an explanation," he said, but his voice had changed, less careful now. "Less managed." "No," I agreed. "It's not." Another silence. This one had a different weight, the kind of silence that is leaning toward something, not leaning away. "Jackie," I said. He was still looking at me. "I've been trying to be appropriate for 2 years," I said. "I'm finding it increasingly difficult." The words landed. I watched them land. His expression shifted, something moving through him that he let me see, for once without managing it away. Something that was startled and warm and cautious and, underneath all of that, quietly, unmistakably glad. "That's," he said, and stopped. And then, softly, "That's also how I would describe the past 2 years. The car stopped at my building, not his. Neither of us moved for a moment." "I'm not expecting anything," I said. "I want to be clear about that." "You have," I chose the words carefully. "You have a great deal that you're navigating. I'm not adding to that, I'm just." I stopped. "Tried again. I needed you to know that you're not alone in this, in any of it. Not professionally, and not." Another pause. The honest version, not otherwise. He was very still. Then he said, quietly, "I'm terrified. I know. Not of you." He met my eyes. "Of everything. Of the situation. And of," he stopped, "of wanting things I don't have the right to want right now." "You have the right to want things," I said. "You always have." He looked at me for a long moment. Something had opened up in his face that I'd never seen before, or never let myself see. Something soft and real and a little raw. The version of him that lived underneath all the careful composure. "I should go in," he said, but he didn't move. "You should," I agreed, and I didn't move either. We sat there for one more minute in the stopped car, not touching, not saying anything, in the particular charged suspension of a moment that knows it's a pivot point. And then he gathered himself quietly and reached for the door. At the door, he turned back. "Lance." "Yes." "Thank you." A pause. "For all of it. The small things." His voice was quiet and very sincere. "No one has ever." He stopped, tried again. "It's meant a great deal." He got out. I watched the lobby doors close behind him, and then I sat in the back of the car for a very long time, looking at the place where he'd been thinking about a man who'd said no one had ever, and feeling the specific sharp ache of everything that implied about how he'd been treated before. I thought, that changes now. 3 days later, on a Saturday, a day that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with being honest, he texted me. It was a simple message, just, "Are you free?" I texted back, "Yes." "Where?" He sent me an address. A coffee place near his apartment, small and quiet, the kind of place that doesn't have its name in neon. I put on a coat and went. He was already there when I arrived, at a corner table with a cup of something that wasn't coffee, chamomile, from the color, and his hands wrapped around it. He was wearing a dark green sweater that I'd never seen before, casual and soft, and he looked different without the office around him. Less armored. More himself. Whatever himself meant when the professional surface was stripped away. He looked up when I came in, and his face did the thing it had been doing lately, softening. A fraction. Before he could arrange it back to neutral, I ordered a coffee, sat down across from him, and waited. I was good at waiting. Or rather, I had learned to be good at waiting for things that were worth waiting for. I want to tell you, he said, the rest of it. You don't have to, I know. He looked down at his cup. But I want to. I think I need to, actually. I've been. He stopped, started again. I've been carrying it very tightly and it's getting heavy. I settled back, gave him room. He told me slowly in that careful, measured way of his, but with the careful measuredness coming apart at the edges, not breaking down, just loosening, the way something tight loosens when the tension is finally allowed to ease. The other person had been someone he'd been seeing for about 5 months. Another Omega, which was its own kind of complicated. Someone who had been warm and interesting and had seemed for a while like something real, except that when Jackie had begun to sense something was changing in himself, when the first vague signs had started, the other person had taken a step back, and then another step, and by the time Jackie had the test result in his hands, standing in his apartment bathroom at 6 in the morning with the kind of stillness that comes after the world rearranges itself, he'd already known, in the way you know things you don't want to know, that he was going to be doing this alone. He wasn't bitter about it, which was what undid me. He told it without bitterness, with the particular clear-eyed sorrow of someone who has processed the grief of being let down and arrived at the other side of it. He had cried, he said, once, properly, the night he was sure. And then he had gotten up and made a list of what he needed to do, because that was who he was, and lists were how he moved through things. I thought about, he stopped. Every option. I thought about all of them. For a while I thought he met my eyes. I wanted this. I didn't know I wanted it until it was there, and then I couldn't. He exhaled, quiet and steady. I couldn't undo it, even alone. You're not alone, I said. He looked at me. His eyes were very clear. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. He was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved along the edge of his mug. I've been trying to figure out, he said slowly, what it is that you're. He stopped. Started more carefully. What this is. For you. Because I trust you and I trust that you mean what you say, but I've also, he stopped again. Then, very honestly, I've also learned that trust doesn't protect you from being wrong about someone. This was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in a very long time, and it deserved an equally honest answer. I've been in love with you, I said quietly. For a considerable portion of the past 2 years. I didn't say anything because you were my assistant and I was your employer and I was, it turns out, a coward about the things that actually mattered. But if you're asking what this is for me, it's not complicated. It's not pity. It's not obligation. It's not circumstance. I held his gaze. It's you, Jackie. It's been you for a long time. The silence that followed this was very long and very full. He looked down at his mug. I watched a muscle move in his jaw. Not tension, but emotion. Held, carefully. Because that was who he was. When he looked up, his eyes were bright, not crying. Holding back crying with the concentrated effort of someone who doesn't cry easily and refuses to do it in a coffee shop, and I loved him for that too. In exactly the way you love someone for their specific, particular, irreplaceable self. That's, he said, and stopped, and looked at me with something luminous and frightened and open all at once. That's a lot to take in. Take your time, I said. Lance, his voice was quiet and very genuine. I've been watching you arrange teas and adjust chairs for weeks, and he stopped. I'm not exactly surprised. Something warm moved through my chest. Good. I'm still frightened. You're allowed to be frightened. It's very complicated. Yes, there's a baby, Lance. He said it plainly, without drama or inflation, just the straight, clean fact of it. I know. That's not a small thing. No. It's not a small thing at all. It's an enormous thing. I leaned forward slightly. Jackie, I'm not asking you to have it all figured out right now. I'm not asking you for anything except, let me in. Let me be here, whatever form that takes. He looked at me for a long time. The coffee shop was quiet around us. The kind of quiet that happens in small places on Saturday mornings when the world is still sleeping and only the very honest or the very tired are out. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said finally. "Neither do I said. "We can figure it out together." The corner of his mouth moved, very small, unmistakably real. "You're very certain," he said. "I'm very certain about this particular thing," I said. "Most other things I manage. This one I'm certain about." He was quiet for another moment. Then he looked down at his cup, and then he looked up at me, and the brightness in his eyes had not retreated. "Then I suppose," he said, very softly, "you'd better get used to chamomile tea." Something broke open in my chest, warm and complete and overwhelmingly simple, the way the truest things are simple. "I can learn to like chamomile tea," I said. "It's terrible," he said, "but it's the only thing that doesn't make me feel ill." "Then chamomile it is." He smiled, the real one, the one that escaped from him like something warm getting loose. And I sat across from him in the small quiet coffee shop on a Saturday morning and thought, this is what I've been walled away from, this exact thing. I wasn't walled away anymore. The weeks that followed were not a montage. Real love rarely is. There's no music swell, no sequence of scenes in golden light that compresses the messy, complicated truth of two people learning each other into something brief and digestible. What there was, instead, was Saturday mornings and chamomile tea. There was Jackie on my couch on a Sunday evening with his shoes off and a blanket over his legs going through documents for Monday, while I sat at the other end of the couch with my laptop, and the easy silence between us that was nothing like the managed silence of the office. There was learning that he hated overhead lighting after 7 in the evening and preferred lamps, so I invested in lamps. There was learning that his humor was dry and quick and came out sideways when he was comfortable, in ways that made me laugh from somewhere genuinely surprised. There was the evening he called me at 11 because he'd had a bad dream and didn't want to say that. So instead, he'd said he'd seen something in the news and wasn't feeling well. And I'd driven over and sat with him on his couch without asking any questions until he fell asleep against my shoulder, and I sat in the careful quiet of his apartment holding very still because he was asleep, and felt the particular fierce gentleness of caring about someone who lets you at last care. There was the morning of the first ultrasound. He'd asked me, quietly, if I wanted to come. It was a question asked with a small, preparatory tension in his face, like he was ready to retract it if I flinched. I didn't flinch. I sat in that clinic with him in the clean, neutral light, and I watched the screen, and I heard the sound, small and rapid and astonishingly present. And Jackie's hand was in mine because he'd reached for it without thinking, and I'd taken it without thinking. And neither of us looked at each other for a moment because we were both looking at the screen with something that was too full for any word I have in my vocabulary. When we walked out into the morning light afterward, he was very quiet. So was I. After about a block, he said, "You're going to be very irritating about this, aren't you?" I looked at him. "The care," he clarified. "The small things. The teas and the chairs and he gestured. "All of it. Probably yes." I thought so. He was quiet for another moment. "I suppose I'll have to tolerate it." But he was smiling, the real one. "Jackie," I said. He turned to look at me on the pavement in the morning light, dark hair and dark eyes, and the soft green of his coat, and everything in his face that I'd been watching manage itself for 2 years was simply open, present. "I love you," I said. Because it was Saturday and the morning was clear and there wasn't any reason anymore to file it under things I wasn't saying. He looked at me for a long moment. His chest moved with a slow breath, and then he said, very quietly and very sincerely, in the way that people say things they've been sitting with long enough to be sure, "I love you too. I've loved you for." He stopped, long enough that I'm mildly embarrassed about the amount of time I spent rearranging it into other categories. I couldn't help it. I laughed, and his expression shifted into something delighted by my surprise by the laugh, and then he was laughing too, and we were standing on a pavement in the morning with absolutely nothing professional about us. Two people who had taken 2 years and the pregnancy test in a trash bin to arrive at a completely obvious truth. He shook his head. "We're ridiculous." "We're thorough," I said. "Lance." "Yes, yes. Come have breakfast with me." We had breakfast. We had it at the small cafe near his apartment. The one where he knew the owner and the owner called him by name, and the croissants were the real thing. We ate and talked, and the morning went on around us, warm and unhurried. And I sat across from Jackie Harper in the ordinary light of an ordinary Saturday and thought, nothing about this is ordinary. This is the least ordinary thing that has ever happened to me. This is the thing I didn't know I was waiting for. Here is what I can tell you about the months that followed, as honestly as I can tell it. Love, real love. The kind that arrives not in a grand gesture but in accumulation. It's less like a wave and more like a tide. It doesn't overtake you all at once. It moves in and takes up more space slowly and steadily until you look around one day and everything looks different and you can't quite point to when the change happened because it happened in every small moment, every accumulated morning. Jackie moved through his pregnancy with the same particular grace he moved through everything. Not without difficulty, but with a kind of rooted dignity that I came to understand was fundamental to who he was. He had difficult weeks and easier weeks. He had moments of absolute confidence and moments in the very early mornings when I'd wake up to a text sent at 3 a.m. that just said, "I'm scared." And I would type back, "I know. I'm here." Sometimes he'd call. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes I'd drive over. I kept a bag at my place ready for this, just in case, because I'm an alpha who expresses love through logistics when he hasn't quite learned to express it through poetry yet. I'd arrive and we wouldn't talk much. I'd make him something to eat if he could stomach it, or I'd just sit with him in the lamplit quiet of his apartment while he worked through the 3 feelings until morning arrived and reset things to something more manageable. I was not always perfect at this. I should say that clearly because I don't want to tell this story like I was. There were times I moved too fast, made decisions about things I thought would help without asking, arranged things without consulting him, operated on the alpha impulse of fix it now, and found myself corrected gently but very clearly by a man who had very strong feelings about his own autonomy and who was fully willing to articulate them. "I'm not a problem to be solved," he told me once, not unkindly but firmly, when I'd rearranged his work schedule without asking because I thought it would give him more rest. "I know that," I said. "Then ask," he said. "I want you here. I want your help. But I want to choose what help looks like." "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry." He looked at me for a moment. Then his expression shifted into something wry and warm. "You apologize well, at least. I've been practicing on other things." "Hmm?" He picked up his tea. "Work on the asking part." I worked on the asking part. It was, in its own way, good practice for the rest of my life, learning that care isn't a unilateral action, that love, real love, is a collaboration, that the question asked is often more valuable than the solution offered. He taught me things, Jackie did, not intentionally. He wasn't trying to be instructive, but he was someone who moved through the world differently than I did, who had spent more time paying attention to what was needed rather than what was achievable, and being close to him rearranged some of my fundamental categories. In the office, because we decided together carefully to continue working together for as long as it was comfortable for him, with a professional clarity and a mutual commitment to doing it well. Things had changed and hadn't changed. He was still excellent. He was still the best person I'd ever worked with, but now when he flagged something in a margin sometimes he'd include a small drawing, a tiny coffee cup if the annotation was important, a small star if it was particularly good news. And I had begun to find these drawings the most anticipated part of my morning review. He found out I'd kept them. I had a file on my laptop, screenshots of the best ones. He found it accidentally when he was reviewing a presentation draft and I'd left a tab open. He closed my laptop lid and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before on his face, something half mortified and entirely moved. "Lance." "Yes?" "You have a file." "I don't know what you're referring to." "A file of my margin drawings." "That's an inaccurate characterization of Lance." I held his gaze, conceded. "There are 47 of them." He was very still. Then he said quietly, as though it required more courage than it looked, "I draw them because I think of you when I annotate your documents. That's why they started." The words sat in the air between us and did their work. "I know," I said. "You knew?" I said, "Hugh, I suspected." He exhaled slowly, something unwinding in his expression. "You are the most." He stopped. He was smiling. "You're very much a lot, do you know that? I've been told." in the most specific and irritating and— He stopped again. His hand came up and he rubbed his face, something slightly undone in the gesture in the best possible way. I really do love you. I know, I said. I love you too. 37 weeks. That was when everything became, in the most visceral and concrete sense, real. I'd driven Jackie to his 36-week appointment and then to dinner after, which had become our routine. Dinner somewhere quiet, something that agreed with him, which by that point had narrowed considerably, and then home to his apartment where I'd installed myself in an arrangement that had evolved so gradually neither of us had quite formally acknowledged it. I was simply there most evenings and most mornings, and his apartment had my coffee in the cabinet and my toothbrush in the bathroom and a drawer that had become my drawer without either of us making a statement about it. We were on the couch at 10 in the evening, which was late for him these days. He had his feet in my lap because his ankles had been bothering him, and I had my hand loosely over them in the absent-minded way I'd developed. And he was reading something on his tablet, and I was looking at a contract review, and neither of us was talking because we'd arrived in those months at the rare and particular piece of two people who are comfortable enough to simply be in the same space. He went still, not dramatically, not with any sound, just still. The way he went still when he was processing something, but this still was different, Jackie. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very evenly, I think we may need to make some arrangements. I put down the contract. How urgent, he considered this. Moderate, a pause, increasing. We made it to the hospital in good time, because I am a man who has mental plans for contingencies. And this particular contingency I had planned for with an attention to detail that would have impressed even Jackie. The bag was in the car. The hospital had been called ahead. The doctor was available. Jackie, for his part, was extraordinary. I want to write this honestly. I want to record what he was in those hours because he deserves to have it recorded. He was the calmest person in every room he was in. He was in pain. He didn't hide that because there was no point in hiding it, and because he was by that point, past the need to manage how he appeared to me, but he carried himself through the whole of it with a focused, quiet steadiness that made me think of the word indomitable, which is a word I don't use lightly. I stayed. I held his hand when he wanted it and gave him space when he needed it, and did whatever the medical staff told me to do and managed to stay out of the way while being present, which is a delicate balance that I had not previously known I was capable of. At 2:14 in the morning, our daughter arrived. That sentence still sits strangely in the world. Our daughter? A collection of words that has rearranged everything that came before it and everything that will come after it. She was very small. She had Jackie's eyes immediately, or I thought so. That same quality of dark, steady attention, watching the world with the alert seriousness of someone deciding what to make of it. She was loud for approximately 4 minutes, and then she went quiet in a way that suggested she was satisfied with her opening statement. They placed her in Jackie's arms, and Jackie, who had managed himself through everything, who had carried 9 months of enormous things with composure and dignity and quiet courage, looked at her and simply let go. Not of anything bad, just let go of the managing. Let his face say exactly what he felt, which was enormous and terrifying and completely full. And he looked at her the way people look at things they cannot believe are real. And then he looked at me, and in his face in that moment was something I will spend the rest of my life being grateful I was there to see. Lance, he said. Just that. My name. I moved closer, looked at her, at this small, alert, entirely real person who had arrived and who had rearranged the air in the room around herself like someone who has always been inevitable. Hello, I said, which was perhaps not the most eloquent thing I've ever said, but she seemed to find it acceptable. Jackie laughed, hoarse and real and completely undone. Hello? That's what you've got? I'm working on something better. Take your time. She's not going anywhere. I sat beside him, close, his shoulder against mine. This small new person between us in the circle of his arms. And I thought, I found a pregnancy test in a trash bin, and it turned out to be the direction to everything I didn't know I was missing. The universe and its blunt deliveries. I thought, thank you for the messy, improbable, absolutely not planned chain of events that led to this room, this hour, this specific collection of people. Here is the part of the story that stories don't always tell. The after. The after is not a conclusion. The after is the beginning of the actual thing, the long, slow work of it, the life that gets made in all the ordinary days that don't have dramatic turning points. It is 3 in the morning with a baby who has opinions. It is learning to function on less sleep than you thought was survivable. It is 2 people navigating the beautiful, complicated territory of actually living together, of having habits and preferences and needs and bad days and good days and days that are both. Jackie went back to work part-time at 4 months because he wanted to, because his work was part of who he was, and he didn't want to lose it. We had good help, and we had each other, and we had a schedule that we revised approximately every 3 weeks, because the baby, as it turned out, had her own views on schedules. We named her Hazel. She was Jackie's suggestion, and I agreed immediately because it suited her. Something about the particularity of it, the quiet specificity, the way it fit the small, severe person she seemed to be becoming. In the office. Because we decided together and again carefully that Jackie would return to working with me, with a clear professional arrangement and an equally clear personal one, things were different. Better. The professional part was what it had always been, which was excellent, and underneath it was a different texture, something warmly grounded and real. He still left notes in the margins. I still had the file. It had 47 more entries. I proposed to him on a Thursday evening, which I recognize runs counter to my opening note about not starting with the day of the week, but I want to be accurate. It was a Thursday. We were at home, our home by that point, the apartment we'd moved into together when Hazel was 2 months old, and she was asleep in the other room, and we were doing dishes in companionable quiet, which was our most domestic ritual, and one I found extraordinarily peaceful, and I dried my hands on the dish towel and turned to him and said, "Jackie." He turned, dish in hand, and read my face. The dish went down. "I would like," I said, "to marry you. If you want to. When you want to. However you want to." He looked at me for a long time. "No ring?" he said. "I wasn't sure of your preferences." Smart. He was quiet. "Lance, yes. I've wanted to marry you since approximately the 14th month you were my employer, which is information I probably should have done something with sooner. We've established we're both thorough." "Yes." He picked up the dish again, set it down again, looked at me with bright, steady eyes. "Yes. Yes, you'll marry me? Yes, I'll marry me. Yes, I'll marry me you. Marry you." He shook his head. "Yes, Lance, obviously yes. Did you think I was going to say anything else?" I hadn't been certain, which was the honest answer. I had hoped. I had believed. But certainty is a different thing, and I had learned, in the months with Jackie, to hold things openly, to believe in them without demanding that the universe confirm them in advance. He came toward me across the small kitchen, and I met him halfway, and he put his arms around me and I put mine around him. And we stood there in the kitchen with the dishes not done, and Hazel asleep in the other room, and the city outside going about its business without any awareness of this specific moment in this specific kitchen, and everything was very quiet and very full. "I love you," he said into my shoulder. "I love you," I said into his. He pulled back just enough to look at me. His expression was the one I loved most, the one where everything was present and nothing was managed, where he was entirely himself, entirely there. "We're going to need a ring," he said. "I know. I have opinions. I know that too. I'll send you a document." I laughed. He grinned. And it was the truest, simplest thing in the world. The laughter, the grin, the kitchen, the quiet apartment, the sleeping child in the other room, the 2 of us standing in the middle of it. I walk past that trash bin every day. It's still in the same spot, same model, same color, the one that sits between my desk and what used to be Jackie's assistant station, which is now occupied by a very capable young woman named Elena, who does excellent work and does not leave pregnancy tests in the bin, which is, I think, appropriate. Jackie works from a different office now down the hall, his own space with his own door and his own title, Director of Special Projects, which is a title we designed together to accommodate the range of things he actually does, which is substantial. He is, it turns out, even more brilliant with more authority. This surprises exactly no one who knows him. He stops in the mornings when he arrives, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 15. We have coffee. He has tea, still chamomile, still terrible by my measure, though I've developed a tolerance for it. And we go over the day. And then we go about our separate work in the way that two people who share a life can share a building and a day and still be individual and professional and excellent. Hazel is 18 months now. She has Jackie's eyes and, I've been told, my stubbornness, which I think is uncharitable but which the evidence supports. She has a very strong sense of what she wants, which she expresses loudly and without apology. I find this admirable in a way that Jackie finds both endearing and slightly alarming. On a Friday evening a few weeks ago, I was leaving the office late, old habits, and I stopped in the doorway to turn off the lights, and I looked at the trash bin in its corner. And I thought about a morning 2 years ago when I'd knocked a pen off the desk and bent to retrieve it, and the world had gently, firmly, completely rearranged itself. I thought, I didn't plan this. I would never have had the imagination to plan this. I thought, thank you for the pen, for the angle of the light, for the clear-eyed dignity of a man who put a pregnancy test in the trash, and then arrived to work exactly on time and pressed his hand briefly to his stomach when he thought no one was looking, and carried everything, all of it with such particular and irreplaceable grace that I couldn't pretend anymore that I was only looking at the professional version. I thought, love finds you before you're ready. That's not its flaw, that's its nature. I turned off the light. I went home. Jackie was in the kitchen when I came in. Hazel was in her high chair, conducting negotiations around a bowl of soup she had opinions about. The apartment smelled like something good on the stove, and the particular warmth of home, which is a warmth I didn't know I was missing until it was present, and now cannot imagine being without. Jackie looked up, held my gaze for a moment with the particular expression he'd developed recently, the one that means he knows I've been in my head again, which he can read off me the way I can read a contract. Which is to say, instantly and completely. What are you thinking about? He asked. I hung up my coat, crossed the kitchen, kissed his cheek, which made Hazel pound the tray of her high chair in what I have chosen to interpret as approval. Trash bins, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he laughed, real and warm and entirely his. Lance. Lance? Sit down, dinner's almost ready. I sat down, dinner was ready. Hazel eventually reached an accord with the soup, and the city went on outside, all those lights blinking in patterns, and inside this kitchen there was warmth, and a small person with very strong opinions, and a man I loved more than I'd known it was possible to love someone, and a life that had found me before I was ready. Which was, it turned out, exactly when I needed it. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.